The rain hammered against the funeral home windows as I stood in the back corner, watching my family gather around Mom's casket. The establishment was one of those expensive places on the Upper East Side, with crystal chandeliers and plush carpet that muffled every footstep. Mom would have hated the pretentiousness, but Dad insisted on maintaining appearances. My simple black dress, cotton, unadorned, nothing flashy, drew disapproving glances from relatives who'd arrived in designer outfits and expensive jewelry. The fabric felt smooth against my skin, deceptively simple in its elegant construction. "Victoria," my sister Miranda hissed, sliding up beside me with her perfectly styled blonde hair and $1,000 Hermes bag. She wore a black Chanel suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "At least try to look presentable next time. This is Mom's funeral, not some garage sale." She gestured dismissively at my dress, her diamond bracelet catching the fluorescent lights. "I mean, I know money's tight for you, but surely you could have borrowed something decent? You're embarrassing the family. Aunt Patricia was just asking me if you needed financial help to buy appropriate clothing." I looked down at my dress, a piece I'd personally designed 6 months ago. The fabric was hand-woven Italian silk, sourced from a mill in Tuscany that had been crafting luxury textiles for over 2 centuries. The simplicity was intentional, elegant in its restraint, what the fashion industry called quiet luxury. But Miranda saw only what she wanted. Her younger sister, the family disappointment, too poor to dress appropriately. "You're right," I said quietly, smoothing down the fabric that had cost more per yard than Miranda's entire outfit. "I should have put more thought into it." Miranda smiled triumphantly and returned to the front row. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing through the solemn space. Dad stood near the casket in his expensive charcoal suit, playing the grieving widower while secretly checking his phone for stock updates. His consulting business had been struggling for 18 months, though he'd never admit it publicly. His clients were moving to younger, more innovative firms, but his pride prevented him from adapting to the changing market. My brother James whispered to his wife about the inheritance, assuming I couldn't hear them. He wore his best navy suit, the one he'd bought when promoted to regional manager at First National Bank. The promotion had come with dangerous confidence, leading him to make riskier loans and bend regulations. "Poor Victoria," James's wife Sarah murmured loud enough for half the room to hear. "Still working at that little boutique downtown. Maybe now that Mom's gone she'll finally get serious about her life." Sarah had never worked, supported entirely by James's banking salary and her grandparents' trust fund. She spent her days shopping and attending charity luncheons where she played at philanthropy without understanding the causes. I stayed silent, letting them believe what they needed. For 5 years, I'd carefully maintained the illusion of being the struggling younger daughter, working at a small fashion boutique, living in a modest apartment, driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic. The apartment was actually a penthouse I'd purchased through a shell company, designed to look modest while containing a sophisticated workspace where I managed my growing empire. The Honda was deliberate, reliable, invisible, perfect for moving through the city without attracting attention. They were comfortable, successful in their minds, completely unaware of the empire I'd built while they dismissed my ambitions as childish fantasies. The funeral service dragged on with hollow speeches about Mom's kindness. I remembered her differently. The woman who'd supported my early interest in fashion, who'd driven me to design classes when I was 12, who'd believed in my vision when everyone else called it playing with dolls. She'd saved tip money from the diner where she worked nights to pay for my art supplies. Mom had been gone from our lives long before cancer took her, worn down by years of Dad's indifference and my siblings' constant demands. During her final months, I'd anonymously paid all her medical bills through a charitable foundation I'd established. The family never knew where the money came from. During the viewing, relatives approached with that mixture of pity and condescension reserved for family members who hadn't made something of themselves. "Victoria, sweetheart," Aunt Patricia cooed. "How are you holding up? I know this must be especially difficult for you, what with your circumstances." Uncle Robert nodded sympathetically. "If you need help finding a better job, I know people in retail management. Nothing glamorous, but steady work with benefits." Each offer felt like a small knife, twisted with good intentions and complete misunderstanding. They saw my quiet demeanor and modest appearance as evidence of failure, never considering that success might look different than their expectations. After the burial, the family gathered at Dad's house for the traditional meal. The house showed signs of deferred maintenance and financial strain: cracking leather furniture, carpet needing replacement, paint peeling where water damage had gone untreated. I helped serve food while Miranda held court in the living room, regaling everyone with stories of her modeling shoots and incredible opportunities. Her biggest contract was with Lumiere Fashion House, a mid-tier luxury brand specializing in accessible high fashion. The photographer said I had the perfect look for their new campaign, Miranda announced. Very natural, very authentic. They're launching a major advertising push next month, and I'm the face of the brand. She didn't mention the campaign's modest budget, or that Lumiere was struggling to compete with larger luxury brands. Her contract was worth $200,000 annually, decent money for a regional model, but hardly the fortune she implied. Did you see Victoria's dress today? Miranda announced loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen. I mean, I understand she's struggling, but there are limits to what's appropriate for family occasions. Several family members chuckled. Aunt Patricia shook her head sympathetically. That girl needs guidance. Maybe now she'll realize she can't keep pretending she's some kind of artist. I continued arranging sandwiches, my face neutral. The sandwiches were from an expensive catering company. I'd anonymously paid for the entire reception, knowing Dad couldn't afford the spread the family expected but would never admit to financial limitations. Let them talk. Tomorrow everything would change. The next morning I sat in my real office. Not the tiny boutique where I maintain my cover, but the executive suite on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower downtown. My corner office offered panoramic views of the city, with custom-designed furniture by Italian craftsmen who worked for European royalty. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the cityscape like living artwork, and my assistant Sophia brought me coffee in a cup that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The coffee was from a small Jamaican plantation that produced fewer than £1,000 annually. The termination papers are ready, Miss Victoria, Sophia said, placing a leather folder on my desk. She was a London School of Economics graduate who spoke 4 languages fluently. Miranda Santos, exclusive contract with Lumiere Fashion House, effective immediately. I reviewed the documents. Miranda's modeling contract was about to disappear. She had no idea that Lumiere Fashion House was just one of 17 brands under my umbrella company, Apex Fashion Group. She'd bragged to the family about her big break 8 months ago. The contract termination had been carefully crafted by my legal team. Creative differences was vague enough to avoid lawsuits while damaging enough to make other agencies hesitant. In modeling, reputation was everything, and unexplained terminations raised career-ending questions. Also, Sophia continued, the financial team prepared reports on your family's situations. Your father's consulting firm is 3 months behind on office rent facing eviction. Your brother's bank is under federal investigation for loan irregularities with potential criminal charges. Miranda has been using her modeling income to cover significant credit card debt. I nodded, unsurprised. While they'd criticized my lack of ambition, I'd quietly observed their financial struggles. Dad's business had been declining for 2 years, but pride prevented him from admitting it. He'd lost 3 major clients to younger, more innovative firms. James had made questionable decisions, approving loans for friends and family who didn't meet standard criteria. Federal banking regulators had noticed the pattern and launched an investigation that could result in fraud charges. Miranda lived beyond her means, funding her lifestyle with credit cards, hoping her modeling career would solve everything. She owed nearly $60,000 across 8 cards. My phone buzzed with a text from Miranda. Just got to my shoot. This Lumiere contract is going to change everything. Maybe I can finally help you get a real job. Love you, sis. Face blowing a kiss. I smiled and set the phone aside. In 3 hours she'd discover her contract had been terminated. The industry was small and gossip-driven. Word would spread quickly. Other agencies would assume she'd done something wrong, making new representation exponentially more difficult. But I wasn't doing this from cruelty. My family needed to understand reality, their reality and mine. At 2:47 p.m. my phone exploded with calls. First Miranda, hysterical and confused. Then Dad, demanding to know if I had any connection to Miranda's career problems. Then James, convinced I was involved in the federal investigation of his bank. I let them all go to voicemail, listening with growing fascination. In their panic, they revealed more about their true circumstances than they'd ever admitted during years of casual conversations. Instead of returning calls, I headed to where everything started. Mom's boutique downtown. The same little shop where I'd maintained my cover, pretending to be another employee helping customers find affordable clothing. The boutique sat on prime real estate in the Arts District, a narrow storefront between a trendy coffee shop and art gallery. Most people saw it as a quaint business, barely profitable. They had no idea that the entire block, including the coffee shop, gallery, and 6 other buildings, belonged to me through shell companies. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of fabric and possibility. This was where I'd tested early designs, learned what real customers wanted, built the foundation of everything that came after. The boutique's modest profits meant nothing compared to its value as market research. My phone rang. Miranda calling for the 6th time. "Victoria, please, I need to talk to someone. Something terrible happened. Lumiere Fashion House terminated my contract out of nowhere. They won't tell me why, just creative differences. I don't understand what I did wrong." Her voice was shaky, desperate. This was probably the first time her looks and charm hadn't solved a problem immediately. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "These things happen in the fashion industry. But I need this job. I have bills, payments. Maybe you could ask around? You work in fashion, right? Maybe someone at your little boutique knows someone." My little boutique. If only she knew that the woman she'd dismissed owned not just Lumiere Fashion House, but Meridian Designs, Apex Luxury, and manufacturing facilities in 12 countries. "I'll see what I can do," I said. "Thank you. And Victoria, I'm sorry about what I said yesterday. At the funeral. I was upset and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair." For a moment, I heard something genuine in her voice. The sister I'd grown up with before success and competition drove wedges between us. But the apology was motivated by need, not real understanding. That evening, Dad called. "Victoria, we need to talk. There are complications with the business. I might need to borrow some money to cover expenses while I sort things out." "How much money?" I asked. "Maybe 20,000? Just temporarily. I know you don't have much, but if you could take out a loan." $20,000. I'd spent more than that on the dress I'd worn to Mom's funeral. The simple dress Miranda had criticized. "I don't think I can arrange that kind of money," I said. "Right. Of course. We'll figure something out." The defeat in his voice was heartbreaking. He'd built his identity around being the successful patriarch. Admitting financial failure to his youngest daughter was devastating. The next day brought more calls. James needed legal representation. Miranda had been dropped by her agency and faced eviction. Dad's business was on the verge of bankruptcy. And they all looked to me, the family failure, expecting nothing but hoping for small miracles. I decided it was time for a family meeting. "I've rented a conference room at the Meridian Tower," I told them. "We need to discuss some things face to face." "The Meridian Tower?" Dad sounded impressed. "Isn't that expensive?" "I know someone who got us a discount," I said. Saturday afternoon, my family gathered in Conference Room A on the 42nd floor. The room was a masterpiece of corporate design, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic city views, a polished mahogany table, leather chairs, and a wall-mounted display system. They looked uncomfortable in the sleek space. Miranda had dressed down, her designer outfits replaced by jeans and a sweater. Dad and James wore their best suits, trying to project success as their worlds crumbled. "Thank you all for coming," I said, standing at the head of the table. "I wanted to discuss our family's situation honestly." "If this is about money," Dad interrupted defensively, "we don't expect you to solve our problems. We know you're doing your best with limited resources." "Actually," I said, "I want to show you something." I activated the display screen and pulled up the first slide. Apex Fashion Group's corporate structure. 17 brands, 43 retail locations across North America and Europe, manufacturing partnerships across 4 continents. "This is my company," I said simply. The room fell silent. Miranda stared at the screen with growing recognition. She knew these brand names, had coveted pieces from several. "I don't understand," James said slowly. "This looks like a multi-billion-dollar corporation." "That's because it is. Current valuation is approximately $2.8 billion. I clicked to the next slide. Financial performance over 5 years. Revenue growth averaging 37% annually, profit margins exceeding industry standards, market expansion turning unknown brands into household names. The boutique downtown is my first location. I kept working there to stay connected to real customers and maintain a low profile. Miranda found her voice first. You own Lumiere Fashion House? Among others. 16 other brands to be precise. But you terminated my contract. I terminated Miranda Santos's contract. The agency never knew Victoria Santos was their ultimate boss. Dad studied the financial projections with sharp attention. This level of success. Victoria, why didn't you tell us? Because you never asked what I was actually doing. You saw what you expected. The struggling youngest daughter, the family disappointment. I clicked to the next slide. Documentation of my family's current financial situations. Dad's failing business, James's legal troubles, Miranda's debt crisis. I've been watching you struggle with problems I could solve with a phone call. But you were so convinced of my limitations that you never considered I might be capable of more. The room remained silent as they processed this information. Finally, Miranda spoke, barely above a whisper. At Mom's funeral, that dress was from my most recent collection. Hand-woven Italian silk, custom designed. Retail value would be around $12,000 if it were available for sale. Miranda covered her face. I told you it looked cheap. You told me what you believed based on your assumptions about my life. James was scrolling through his phone. Victoria, this says you're the youngest person ever to build a fashion empire of this scale. Forbes calls you the invisible titan. Forbes featured me on their cover 6 months ago. None of you mentioned seeing it. We don't really read Forbes, Dad admitted. I clicked to the final slide. A photo of our family at Mom's funeral. We stood around the casket, each isolated despite our proximity. Dad checking his phone, James whispering about money, Miranda posing even in grief, and me standing alone in my simple dress. Mom knew, I said quietly. Not the specifics, but she knew I was building something important. She was the only one who asked about my work, who listened when I talked about design and business strategy. The room felt heavy with unspoken regrets. What happens now? Dad asked. That depends on what you want. I can solve your immediate financial problems, all of them, with a single bank transfer. But I won't go back to being treated like the family failure. Miranda looked up, tears streaming down her face. I don't know how to apologize for this. For not seeing you. You can start by seeing me now. Really seeing me, not the version that fits your expectations. Over the next 2 hours, we began rebuilding our family relationships on truth instead of assumptions. The conversation was painful, full of acknowledgments of hurt and years of misunderstanding, but also healing. I offered Dad a consulting contract with Apex Fashion Group. His business experience was valuable, just misapplied. James's banking expertise could help with international expansion once he resolved his legal issues. Miranda had genuine modeling talent, but more importantly, she understood fashion from a consumer perspective that could inform our marketing strategies. There's one condition, I said. The boutique downtown stays exactly as it is. I'll continue working there some days, staying connected to the real world. Success doesn't mean losing touch with why I started this. 4 months later, our family gathered again for a happier occasion. Apex Fashion Group was going public, and the IPO celebration was in the same conference room where I'd revealed the truth. The transformation was remarkable. Dad had thrown himself into consulting work with renewed energy, helping revitalize 3 struggling fashion companies we'd acquired. James had resolved his legal issues and been promoted to head international banking for our European expansion. Miranda returned to modeling exclusively for our brands, helping develop campaigns that spoke to real women. As I stood at the podium preparing to ring the opening bell, I thought about Mom. She would have been proud, not of the money but of the family we were becoming. A family that finally saw each other clearly. The stock opened at $47 per share and closed at $62, valuing Apex Fashion Group at over $4 billion. The financial press hailed it as one of the most successful fashion IPOs in history. But the real victory had happened months earlier in a funeral home, when I'd chosen dignity over defensiveness and truth over comfort. My family had spent years telling me what I couldn't afford, never bothering to discover what I'd actually built. Now they knew the difference between assumptions and reality. And so did I.